Dungeons are a crucial part of Souls games because even if the game has a great gameplay system on a mechanical level, the actual application of those mechanics and the situations you use them in can make or break the experience. Elden Ring has some really good standout dungeons that could even be some of the best in the series. However, it also has a handful of dungeons that I personally think fall short. Given the amount of legacy dungeons there are, I feel the best way to approach critiquing them is to look at each of them individually, as like I said, there is such a large range of quality within the game. Stormveil Castle is the first and arguably best legacy dungeon in the game. Its layout is quite interesting with the two paths you can take. The main path is obviously not recommended, especially if it is your first time playing through the game, and the NPC you meet even says so. The side path is what most players will take, and it's really well done. The encounters on this path are well put together and offer a wide range of types of interactions. The first room you'll enter calls back to the very first level of the Souls series, the Gates of Boletaria, where you fight your way up the inside of the castle wall, and this encounter is pretty enjoyable. The layout of the area is both interesting visually and from a geographical perspective. Visually, you get a lot of good views while climbing the side of the castle, and it is also an interesting layout to traverse and observe how the castle is put together. Once we reach the top, we have to descend to the ground floor to make progress in the level. And along this path, there are some admittedly frustrating parts, particularly with the birds. The birds can be quite annoying to fight sometimes, especially in packs. But besides the main path, there are a lot of areas that you can explore on the side. Stormveil Castle has a lot of really great side areas off the main path that have some great encounters and pretty good rewards too. The castle is actually really large, and you can explore pretty much all of it. It feels like a real castle in the sense that there are so many different types of areas, and you can explore almost all of it. And of course, exploring the many areas of the castle is really enjoyable. And part of that is because at this point in the game, all these enemies are new. The majority of the enemies in the castle are new to the player, which makes it more fun and exciting. The one enemy that is reused that I feel like might be a little controversial is the Crucible Knight you can find. The Crucible Knight was already a boss in Limgrave, and it can be found again here. I can see how this might be frustrating or seem lazy to some, but I personally don't mind it too much. I think it's a fun fight, and it's nice to have one here in the castle, but I could see how reusing an enemy could ruin the experience of finding this hidden area. But as a whole, the dungeon is really well done, and it's one of the best in the game. It's a really interesting area with a lot of good enemies and exploration. The boss at the end also is pretty good, and ties into the themes of the area with the grafting and whatnot. Volcano Manor is another really good legacy dungeon in Elden Ring. I've actually already talked about this area in its own video a little while ago, but I'm gonna talk about it again here. Volcano Manor is a really great area, in its visuals, design, and layout, and enemies. The design is pretty good, having different areas and sections of the dungeon. It's connected pretty well, and the layout is also good. The enemies, maybe aside from the Iron Virgins, are also pretty good. The main enemy of the area is the snake guy, which feels really well balanced and good to fight. They are quite different from the typical knights, both visually and in the way they fight. It provides a nice switch from the standard enemies you usually see. They're also a unique enemy to this area as far as I know. This gives Volcano Manor that uniqueness, which can also be found in the visuals of the area. Being in a volcano, there's lots of lava, but there are some other areas that are quite interesting visually. In some indoor parts of the dungeon, there are dark corridors with Albinorc enemies that can make it a little creepy at times. It's generally really well done across the board, having some areas to explore, a good layout that connects the areas of the dungeon, as well as the actual Volcano Manor with the NPCs, and good enemies and encounters. There are a lot of different pathways to go down, but they all point you towards the way you need to go. There's a lot to explore, and it is quite enjoyable and interesting to see all the different corners of the Volcano Manor. again because the visuals are really good too. A lot of the areas not only look visually distinct, but also offer unique combat scenarios, at least in the dungeon. There's a good variety in the combat encounters found here, which makes it feel like you're not just repeating the same thing over and over again. The iron versions are repeated throughout the level, but they are used differently in their encounters. The progression of the area is also well done. The graces are well placed, giving a good amount of space in between them. The area as a whole is well balanced, and it's one of the better dungeons in the game. Leyndell, the royal capital, is another of Elden Ring's legacy dungeons, and this one is the most well regarded and highly praised of them. The dungeon itself doesn't do anything crazy with enemies or encounters mechanically, but the most impressive thing about it is the sheer scale and expansiveness that it has to offer. There are a multitude of branching paths you can take at any moment, which lead to completely different areas. Besides the dungeon being incredibly large itself, there are paths that lead to entirely new areas, one of which being the subterranean shunning grounds, a sewer system of sorts, which leads to another area, the Deeproot Depths, although the Deeproot Depths can be reached by other means. But still, this level of connectivity is very impressive. It's genuinely very cool to stumble on a completely new area. And speaking of the shunning grounds, as it is technically a legacy dungeon I believe, and that's what we're talking about, it isn't the worst. People tend to dismiss swamps or sewer areas because they can be annoying, but I don't mind the idea of them. I think it can be really cool. The Depths is one of my favorite areas in Dark Souls 1, and the shunning grounds of Elden Ring are quite similar to that concept. It's a dirty sewer system, which is an interesting visual idea and atmosphere, and I think the enemies are fine. Although, beyond a mechanical level, the omens have a lore significance which is pretty cool. But anyway, I got sidetracked. Getting back to Leyndell, and now that I say it, what just happened there could be very similar to the experience one could have in game. But anyway, Leyndell really does feel like a city. There are so many paths to take, so many areas to explore within just one dungeon. And like I said, the enemies aren't anything crazy, but I think they are used well. The visuals are another thing. The visuals of Leyndell are quite impressive and well done as well. The first view we get is really nice, and also lets us see the entire city, and we find out that we can go everywhere we see. Descending into the city and exploring the different parts of it gives us a lot of different visual areas, even within one dungeon. Again, it really feels like a city with not only its size, but also how many different visually distinct areas it has within it. It definitely deserves the praise it gets, as it is a really well put together area. Miquella's Haligtree and Elfale is a legacy dungeon that I think isn't as bad as some people say, but isn't great either. The opening part on the branches can be a bit of a pain, but I didn't find it that bad to get through. The enemies can be a little annoying, and combined with the branches it can be a little tricky, but again I didn't take too much issue with it, and visually speaking it's a treat to look at. Beyond the branches is the beginning of the town section. It's a little village built on the branches, and again it's visually stunning. The aesthetic and atmosphere of the Haligtree town is gorgeous. However, the area itself doesn't have a single unique enemy as far as I know. I don't take too big of an issue with that, but I'll admit it does kind of suck. The layout of the area is quite linear. There's not much to explore, but I think it's well designed enough. At the end of the town section we fight Loretta again, which is a great boss. The boss is great, and so is the arena. I don't know if it's just me, but I really like the way this area looks. Elfale is after this, and I think it's fine enough. Again, reused enemies occupy the area, although the Cleaner Knights are really good actually, and the encounters with them are decent. Except for the bottom section with the Royal Revenants. Revenants are genuinely awful enemies. They're a nuisance to fight, and the room past the second grace with the 3 Crystallians also is a mess. I don't really know what they were thinking there. But past that room is the Poison Swamp, which I personally don't find to be that big of a problem. Yeah, it's annoying to slowly roll through it, or backstep if you want to be fancy, but it also gives us one of the prettiest views in the game, so you win some and you lose some. From here, there's not much left of the level before the boss, which I think is really good, but we'll talk about that more in the bosses part. Raya Lucaria is an early game dungeon, most likely the second one the player will find, and I have some issues with it. The one positive thing I can say is that it looks great. I've said that about most of the dungeons so far now that I think about it. It is quite impressive what they did visually with the game, with how much of it looks so good. Across the board, Elden Ring has a fantastic art style and art design, and that remains true in Raya Lucaria. The aesthetics of the area are great, but the area itself falls short mechanically. For one thing, the enemies are lackluster at best. Most of them you'll see are the sorcerers, which are annoying, but quite basic, dogs, which are dogs, and the marionette guys, which are fine. The actual level begins with one room, and then the graveyard where you find the other enemy I didn't mention, the zombie-looking guys. It's really underwhelming to see this academy in the distance in Liurnia, then to actually get to it and see the front door with how good it looks, and then to go inside and be greeted by a graveyard. It's called an academy, so you would think there would be more actual school classrooms and hallways, which is a letdown. And it also just doesn't make sense for the first thing to be a graveyard when you walk in. I don't really have much to say. It's a shame that it wasn't designed better and with more of an actual school in mind. It would have been a blast to explore this giant academy with lots of hallways and rooms and floors, but instead we got this. The first boss of the area is the Red Wolf of Radagon, which is pretty good, and then the level opens up to a courtyard, and you can either go to the main boss or explore around the rooftops, where you find more marionettes and eventually loop back to the start of the dungeon. The main boss is mechanically not great. It's really not a great boss, but it's not really annoying either, at least to me, which is a plus. Crumbling Fair Missoula is the last non-optional legacy dungeon of the game, and I think it is a pretty decent area. For one thing, the main enemy of the dungeon is the Beastmen, which, while they're not entirely unique, they were only used as a boss a couple times, which makes it feel like you've gotten stronger to the point where they're just a normal enemy. Banished Knights are also used here, and yeah, they're reused, but they're still pretty good. The area is floating in the sky, and it's designed with a lot of separate floating pieces where you have to jump and platform across them, which is done pretty well. The actual design itself is really good with the architecture it has, though I will say the color palette is quite dull. The level is pretty linear, though there are a few side areas to explore, one of which leading to the culmination of Alexander's questline. Towards the end of the level we have to get through the infamous bird run, and it can be quite annoying, but running through it will get the job done eventually, and the dragon at the end is decent. The encounters in the level are pretty decent, with the Beastmen and the Banished Knights, and I think it's a solid dungeon overall. But there's still one thing that we need to talk about when it comes to dungeons, and that's the side dungeons. Catacombs, mines, caves, heroes' graves, these are all side dungeons, and they're not great. They are honestly incredibly boring and tedious, not to mention repetitive. Almost all of the catacombs feel nearly exactly the same, maybe except a couple good ones. All of these side dungeons have next to no lore or story whatsoever, at least not any that's interesting or relates to the main story. There's no reason to them besides the gameplay, which again is repetitive, and the rewards, which are often not good. They all look the same too, at least the catacombs, mines, and heroes' graves. And of course the enemies and bosses are repeated. Generally the side dungeons are terrible. They're barely ever worth your time, but some of the smaller dungeons that aren't legacy dungeons, which also could be called side dungeons, like Castle Morn or Carrier Manor, are actually pretty good. Castle Morn and Carrier Manor are probably the best ones, but some of the other dungeon type areas are decent too. Elden Ring has a lot of great legacy dungeons, and some bad ones too, but overall the legacy dungeons are pretty good. The side dungeons are bad, but you really don't have to do them if you don't want to, or only do the ones with good rewards. But overall, Elden Ring's main dungeon areas are good.